everyone. Welcome to a new edition of You Lead webinar. I'm going to ask my panelists to turn their videos on and we're going to have our unmuted buttons, all those things going on here in just a second. So thanks so much for joining us again this month. And I do want to just say, Catherine, who normally is with us helping Michelle with the chat, is not here with us today. And so if anything doesn't go right, Michelle and I are going to say, well, it's because Catherine wasn't here. But you know what? We're really glad that you're here and that you've joined us. I am looking at the chat section and I am seeing women like across the country. Like I'm seeing people on the East Coast all the way to the West Coast. So some of you are eating lunch. Some of you are thinking about lunch, and then some of you are like eating breakfast, right? So it's everywhere. And sometimes we have people from all over the country join us as well. I want to just mention before we jump in today a couple of little announcements and things that we want to make sure that you're aware of, and some new things that are coming out by Lifeway Women. Just so you're aware of that, we have two live You Lead events that are coming up in April. Like we're going to be in person in the room and we want to meet you. We want to see you there. The first one is April 8th and it will be in Jackson, Mississippi. So what a fun time to come to the South. In April, it should be a great time to be there. So we would love to see you in Jackson, Mississippi. And then the end of April, April 29th, if you want to come to sunny Florida, we're going to be in Orlando on April 29th at First Baptist Church, Orlando. We'll be at First Baptist Church, Jackson, Mississippi in April, the early date, and then April 29th we'll be at First Baptist Church, Orlando, Florida. And both of those are different events with the enrichment event that we connect you leads to. So you can come to Priscilla Shire in Jackson. You can come to Lifeway Women Live in Orlando. You can come to both. Hey, we don't mind. And every You Lead is unique to every city. We have different topics at different events. And so we would love to meet you there as well. Now, for those of you who say, you know what, I just can't get to a You Lead, or you're not coming close to me, I can't do it. And so we have a new You Lead virtual, which is like 4 hours of virtual training. And you can go to lifeway.com/YouLead. And it's on there for $25. You guys, it's a great price. 4 hours of training. You have through February of 2023, and you can purchase that. You can use it for training with your ministry teams. These are shorter, a little bit shorter videos. So if you come to a You Lead event, you get hour-long breakouts, and we've tried to shorten them on the digital version. So they're about 30-minute breakouts. So we have squeezed in a lot of information in those 30-minute topics. But they are just a great wealth of information, and you can find that on the website as well. A couple other things some door prizes that I want to give away today. And Michelle's going to put a form in the chat section. We'll probably put it in there 2 or 3 times, because if you join us later in the webinar, sometimes you don't always see the chat things. But we have 2 giveaways today. The first one is a new devotional book by Sandra McCracken. It's called Send Out Your Lights. You might know Sandra as a worship leader and as a singer-songwriter, and she has done a beautiful job on this devotional, and so we are going to give that to someone, a lucky winner. You can also hear Sandra and a little bit more about the devotional on the Marked podcast that I co-host, so you can also hear a little bit more about that particular devotional book. Okay, this doesn't even come out till like April 1st, but I got my copy of Candy Gallaty's new The Bible in a Year. I got it just a couple of days ago. It's beautiful, number one, and you have 260 days worth of Bible readings and a Bible reading plan, and you can do this with a group. You can do it on your own, but I think doing it as a D group is really helpful. But it's amazing. Like, I'm so impressed, and I think it's going to be really doable. This doesn't mean you have to wait till January to start it. Candy told me yesterday that she's starting a group in April when this comes out. So definitely check out The Bible in a Year by Candy Gallaty, and I'm gonna give my copy to someone. I kind of don't want to give my copy to someone, but I probably have connections on getting another copy. But I want one of you to get it in your hands, so you'll have it. Even the ladies on this call, they don't have it in their hands yet. Like, it's brand new. It's just hit the warehouse. So those are some things that I wanted to let you know. So fill out that form, and you'll be you'll be entered to win. And then you can also sign up for the Ministry to Women newsletter so that you get leadership tips every month in our newsletter as well. All right, enough commercial. Leslie, Dawn, Brenda, thanks for being here today. We're going to talk about post-pandemic realities. So, Leslie, let's start with you. Just tell them, we're going to introduce ourselves, tell them who you are, where you serve, and just maybe even a little about your family.
Yeah. So I'm Leslie Hildreth, and I currently serve at the Summit Church as their Women's Discipleship Director. I've been doing that for the last 5 years. I'm married almost 30 years to my husband, Scott. We have 2 adult children, Rachel and Jacob, and Rachel has given us 2 grandsons, Hunter and Easton. And I live in the Raleigh-Durham area of North Carolina. I have been in ministry my entire 30 years of marriage with my husband. That's looked different in different seasons. We even served overseas in 2 different continents for 8 years with the International Mission Board as part of our ministry experience. But glad to be with you today.
Thanks, Leslie. All right, Dawn, introduce yourself.
I'm Dawn Stevens, women's minister at the Church at Brookhill in Birmingham, Alabama. Those of you not from the South, you can tell I am born and raised, and have been married 30 years and have a son that's almost 20.
Awesome. All right, Brenda.
Hey guys, Brenda Croston here. I'm married to this wonderful guy who's probably going to creep in the door in a second. So if you hear a door, just act like, that didn't happen. This wonderful guy named Mark. We have 4 children, ages 33 to 27. We have 2 beautiful granddaughters. We serve together at Mount Gilead Missionary Baptist Church. He is the executive pastor. Me now, just as a teacher, I was formerly the women's ministry leader. I am also the CEO of Simple Truth Ministries. We do everything from Bible study to helping you write your book. So that's me. And I'm glad to be here too.
Yes, I know. Well, all of you have been on a webinar before, so you know the routine, you know a little bit about it. Many of you have been on our webinars as well. That we are starting to enter kind of our 3rd year, I can't believe it, of doing this, because do you remember, like, today is March 10th. 2 years ago, it was like the world began to shut down. I think it may have been March 10th. I remember March 9th being in New Orleans. I went for a day trip to the seminary to do a luncheon. And I remember the airport seemed very quiet. People were wiping down everything around them. And there was this sense that things were changing very, very quickly. Even at the luncheon, I started seeing people wearing masks in New Orleans, and I hadn't really seen that. And so within the next week, we really were in this pandemic full blown. And we are really, in a lot of ways, it's 2 years later. We're not out of the pandemic, but we are seeing some changes. We are seeing realities that are changing just a little bit. So I want to do a poll with everyone to kind of get where you think that you are, and maybe your church, and just how you feel like things are in your community. And this will help guide our discussion. So let me launch the poll. And it's really just a basic question of how would you describe your present post-pandemic reality? I said maybe it's still restrictive in your church and community. Maybe restrictions are less, but people are not coming back to church. Maybe your church is back to pre-pandemic numbers. Or maybe there's just a new normal. We don't know that it's going to be normal pre-pandemic, but maybe a new normal for what we have. All right, I'm watching you guys vote. If you're on your phone, sometimes voting in a poll is a little bit difficult, but so if you're on your laptop, it's a little bit easier to see. So hopefully you can find that poll, and we're just about there. Almost 80% of you have voted at this point. All right, I'm going to end the poll, and I'm going to share the results with everyone. So these are the results. 49% of you said that there seems to be a new normal for your church, but almost just as many said the restrictions are less, but people are still not returning back to church. Now, there's a few of you that are in the other categories as well, but that's an interesting place for us to kind of begin, for us to think about this topic, because it is a little bit different. And so, for a lot of you, there's a new normal, and for some of you, it's like, well, we're trying to get back, but yet maybe it's just different. Maybe there's still some things, people aren't coming back. They've left us. So let's jump into this conversation. And I think, Brenda, I mentioned, maybe the numbers aren't the same, but I think we need to look at the reality of where were our churches pre-pandemic. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, Kelly, pre-pandemic, the church was already in decline. The pandemic accelerated it, but it was already in decline. And I know that sounds like bad news, but here's what was really happening. The sense of having to belong to a church, like in decades past, that was gone. People felt spiritual, but they didn't feel that same need to be involved in a church. And so what was happening is the church was clarifying. And a clarified church is a powerful church. Why? Because then we know where to direct our evangelistic efforts. And so it sounds like bad news that the church was already in decline. But it's really clarifying, and it helps us to understand where we should focus our efforts, and more so since the pandemic has happened.
Yeah, I think if you look at any research and statistics, we were seeing some declines already, or just the involvement of that. So just your words of just saying there's a clarification that needs to happen of what did this look like and where we are. Yeah, go ahead.
One more thing I forgot to say is that we are the third largest mission field behind India and China. And that's something for us to know. Again, it helps us to know where we need to focus and the work that's ahead of us.
Good. That's awesome. Awesome.
I think another thing that we didn't talk about was that one of the things that the pandemic showed a lot of churches is that our people don't know how to survive spiritually on their own. And so I think it has really kind of shaken us up a little bit, or kind of showed us some reality where we have failed in the church with our spiritual growth. A lot of our people look at the programs and events they attend as ways to spiritual maturity rather than through relationships. And we're just not really seeing a whole lot of fruit from disciple making. And so I think it's given us an opportunity to look at what we're doing with our people to see spiritual growth and spiritual transformation take place. Because when we shut down and those things weren't offered to our people, they didn't know how to get that for themselves on their own.
True.
It's really a biblical concept when you think about, the New Testament talks about, we need to move from milk to meat, and so we need to become self-feeders. And we realized that a lot of people weren't self-feeding and they didn't know what to do. So that's a great point, Leslie. Hey, Dawn, one of the things, so you work with women at your church, you also work with children with special needs. And there's been a lot of anxiety and things that have, even just still, there's some anxiety. So how does that affect our ministries when we talk about that particular aspect?
Yeah, well, we know before the pandemic, people struggle with anxiety and worry. And of course, COVID just made it worse because they were shut in. They couldn't get to counselors in person. They were worried about, of course, being sick, getting an elderly family member sick, a child with special needs sick, job loss, or all the things that happened that affected people. So it's probably gotten worse over this time. So therefore, if you are normally anxious and now you're trying to come back after COVID, people with struggle with anxiety, they don't push themselves into social situations. They don't push themselves to come back to church. They're hesitant to know how to re-engage. So that affects our ministries. And it's fine, to ask people, are you anxious about coming back to church? How are you feeling about this? It's fine to use that word and talk about it. But it necessitates that our women's ministries have to be very open, very hospitable, very welcoming, because some people are putting a toe back in the water.
Yes.
And, you know, in our area, it's an average of 6 months to see a counselor. I think that's pretty much true across the country. So our churches and our women's ministries have got to be teaching gospel-centered hope to people. The church is equipped to counsel and to love and to guide and shepherd people. And so we really need to make sure our leaders are trained and strengthened to be that hope for people. And then last, I'd just say, give them grace for inconsistent behavior, inconsistent attendance or commitment. If they seem quiet or closed off, just give them much grace there, because they're just putting their toe back in the water. There are a couple of resources that Michelle has. I emailed her 2 websites that have some great resources on anxiety and worry, that you can look at when you want to get a moment.
Yeah, I do think, and I think there's a lot of studies that show this generation being very anxious in general. So you're right, like it hasn't, it's definitely been something that we've seen. You know, we've seen people, you know, show a little more anxiety than even in the past. So that is something that we're seeing. And then also, I think it is easy. Like we were isolated, we were forced to be isolated, and now it's become kind of like it's very comfortable to be isolated. We've developed this comfort level, but there's a whole nother level beyond anxiety that's really, like, we talk about trauma. And Brenda, I wanted you to kind of touch on trauma a little bit and just how it affects different people and different generations.
So Dr. Philip Monroe says that if a pregnant woman experiences trauma, she experiences it, the baby experiences it, and the baby's children are affected by it. Dr. Nadine Burke Harris talks about the fact that trauma over and over again in our lives, it changes our DNA and the way it's read. I mean, like, let that sink in. It changes our DNA. And so what we have to think about in this post-pandemic, in the middle of the pandemic, all of the other things that's happening, there's trauma being hurled on top of trauma. Like Dawn said, people were already traumatized about this, that, or the other. And so we're ministering to the parents of the Alpha generation. And the Alpha generation will be the first generation fully in the new millennia. And so we know, we've read the end of the story, right? We know that the times are going to get worse because the Bible has to fulfill what's going to unfold for us to go to glory. So we have to cognizantly think about that this trauma is being heaped on them. So what do? We educate ourselves. Dawn talked about some resources. We educate ourselves about how trauma affects the body. I'll add to that resource, Dr. Bessel van der Klok's The Body Keeps the Score. So great work on trauma. It's a way for us in the church to inform ourselves how to minister to the Alpha generation's parents, right? So that they can be fully whole in Christ, mentally, physically, and spiritually, so that they can pass that on to the generation coming behind them, because the new millennial church will have to be mentally, physically, spiritually strong. One more thing, when you get a chance, we don't have time to delve into it, but there's Dr. Nadine Burke Harris. She has a TED Talk called How Trauma Affects how childhood trauma, affects long-term health outcomes. So when we're thinking about the fact that all of this trauma that's happening right now, that's being heaped on the parents, heaped on the children, what that's going to look like in the next generation, it's incumbent upon us to educate ourselves and learn how to help people face their traumas, create spaces of grace, like Dawn said, and not throw science aside. We have to understand that God created all of these things. He's in all the sciences. And we, as his children, need to educate ourselves so that we can properly minister to this current age as they minister to the next.
There's a lot to unpack with that, isn't there, Brenda? I mean,
It
when
is.
you think about trauma and you just think about like I think there will be people who, and I think that we really are, it's going to be a few years from now before we really continue to see the effects of what the pandemic has really left us with a little bit. So we've seen the anxiety, we know there's some trauma, but one of the things we're dealing with immediately, and we continue to address this, is grief, because not only did we see people die from the pandemic, but we've lost some things in general. So Leslie, how do we help people grieve? And how do we help them do this well? And how do we give them really the hope for the future?
I think we can do it in a couple of ways. One is we can find an existing space to do it, and also we can create a new space. So when I say an existing space, for example, if you've already started your spring Bible studies for women, think about taking some of your key leadership, give them a really short training, and have maybe 15 to 30 minutes added to either your introduction before your Bible study time begins or for the end of it. And I just want to remind you, if you provide childcare, please make sure that you don't overlook extending that time, because those moms need to be able to participate as well. And so that might look like just a time for, a leader to step out and share first, right? Because sometimes leaders just have to go first to show that vulnerability, just to lead out and just to go. And then maybe have some key leadership that is ready to pray with women, to sit with women and listen. And then also have resources available for people who need further care. And need someone to direct them to good counseling. When you create a new space, one of the things that we did was we had an event at one of our campuses where we had 3 women. We found one that was still in the midst of some grief and suffering. We had one woman who was a little bit further along than her. And then we had a woman that was flourishing and even teaching a grief share course at the church. And those women just shared their stories. And the most important thing about their stories was that the hope that they had in Christ Jesus, right? And that's what we want to do. We want to remind believers that we don't grieve without the hope of Christ. And that's what makes us different than the world. So many times I think, man, I cannot imagine what it might be like without Christ, to grieve and to suffer and to deal with the things that are going on right now. And we don't want to forget that, right? When we do offer this space and this opportunity for women to grieve and to share with one another's burdens and sufferings, we have to remind one another of the gospel and the story and the hope that we have because of what Christ did for us, because that's what makes it different for us. And it also makes it more real to us that we need to be ambassadors of that hope to other people who are suffering without him.
I think that one of the things you said, Leslie, about carrying burdens for one another. I mean, you look at Galatians and it says, carry one another's burdens and thus fulfill the law of Christ. Like that is, and when we do that in grief, we feel that with them, and we experience that grief together. And so I think that's what the church is called to do. And as believers, we're definitely going to feel that need to just, want to carry those burdens. One of the things that have come out of this, so we kind of talked about maybe some of the hard things that we've seen come out of the pandemic, but one of the things that have been a positive, and I think all 3 of you, when we prepped for this webinar, we've seen some new people in our churches. So we've seen this influx of people that maybe found you online during the pandemic, and now they're kind of coming through your doors. So how can our churches prepare for the new people? Dawn, I'm going to ask you to kind of talk about this a little bit.
Yeah, and so I would say either put yourself in the shoes of a new person or ask one of those new women that's come to your church the past 6 months to come by one day and just walk your campus, walk the building, look and see if it's visitor friendly. Is it clean? Is there lighting? Is there direction to the restrooms, the nursery, the baby changing stations? Is it uncluttered? Is it easy to find what they need? And get a new woman's eyes on that and her perspective, and then just ask your housekeeping staff, your facility staff, hey, here's some things this new person has recommended. Can we look at implementing these? Are there plenty of people at the doors to greet and direct women? Do they have name tags on? Are they on time to serve? Are they a friendly face? And then your communication, is it clear? Is your website clear for women? Is it updated? Is it appealing? Like, is it pretty? Women want pretty. That makes women go, oh, I think I want to do that, and click on it. Is it pretty? Is it appealing? So those are just some practical things that we've tried to do this spring and last fall. And I'm having lunch with a lady Monday who's just been online with us. We're still doing a virtual service, live stream. And so we've had lots of people that found us online and then started coming in person. And people are still just now coming back from COVID the past couple of weeks.
Yes, and there's been probably, no matter where you live, you've probably had new people move into your community over the last 2 years. So looking for those visitors, or even as you're in the community, hearing the conversations of people and just saying, if they say, I'm new here, or I just moved here from wherever, and I was actually getting my hair done a couple months ago, and this lady sitting across from me, she had just moved here from another state during the pandemic, and so we just began a conversation about, hey, have you connected with people? Have you made friends? Are you going to church anywhere? And so those are questions that are, and you just be friendly, and just get to know those people. But then, like you said, Dawn, such practical ways of looking at your own space. I mean, here it is spring. We think about spring cleaning in our homes. So think about spring cleaning in your church. Like, maybe set aside a day where you go, you know what, let's have a new perspective on, do we need to do some cleaning up around here? Are things really clear? So those are really good practical things that I think our churches can learn from, Dawn. Those are good. Also, in the midst of that, Leslie, when we have these new people, if they're coming through the doors, we have to think about, are there new leaders here? So how do we develop new leaders that may be coming through our doors?
Yeah, I think that one of the things we need to do is, before we even think about that, is kind of already establishing your DNA with your leadership development and how you try to multiply leaders, is to kind of already have your key leaders who are constantly looking for women to invite along when they are leading. So you're modeling that from the very get-go. But one way that we have new leadership opportunities is we're constantly connecting with whatever areas in the church are going to kind of have first dibs on these people. So think about who does your starting point or your membership classes, make sure that you are conversing with your small groups pastor if you have one of those, so that as new people enter in, whether it's your guest services team or these others that I've said, that you're connecting on a regular basis with those people so that you know who they are and that you have privy to their contact information. And then, depending on the size of your church, if it's a smaller situation, you may be able to individually meet with those people. But if it's a larger church setting, then you may want to get your team of leadership to kind of say, hey, I'll take these few women, you take those, and kind of share the responsibility of just connecting with those new people, figuring out where they've come from, how much experience they have already serving in church opportunities. Because, we have to figure out, is this a woman who needs to be cared for immediately? Or is this a woman who is ready to go? And so those are just some quick ways that you can figure out how to involve that new person and what's going on.
I'm thinking as you're talking about this, Leslie, I'm even thinking about someone like me who I am involved in my church, but things may be a little bit different, or I may have evaluated where I want to serve. And so, even kind of in the last 6 months, my husband and I have started volunteering with 4 and 5 year olds some on Sunday mornings, once a month. And even just, just kind of evaluating, is this where the Lord wants us to serve? Or is there someplace else? And so I think it's a good time for us to really maybe even do some assessments of people that are in our church of saying, hey, maybe
Mm.
you're back and maybe you haven't served somewhere and this is a good place for you to serve. But also those new people, like you said, trying to find them. Okay, so even Brenda, we, most of our churches, even when the pandemic hit, there were some churches who were doing online services. They had it figured out. But for a lot of churches, it was like go time. Like all of a sudden, it was like, oh, wow, we got to figure this out. We got to put our service on
Mhm.
Facebook. We got to do it on whatever. Like there's all different places that people were looking to do this online. And I don't think it's going away. Like doing digital events is not going away. So, um, how do we, like, what do we do now? Like, what do we do with the whole like live stream and digital?
So yeah, digital is here to stay. And I had this experience this week and I didn't realize it was preparing me for this conversation. But I was trying to walk a client through marketing some things and directing her to some social media and things like that. And her whole body language changed and she got upset with me, visibly upset with me. And I realized that um, it's new. It's like in Acts 1 when it says, but you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes on you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, and Samaria, and the uttermost parts of the earth. It's like social media is like sending people, or online services like sending people to Samaria. Nobody wants to go. But you know what Jesus said? He said, I need to go to Samaria. I have to go because there's ministry there. And so go ahead and put this in your heart and your mind. Digital is here to stay. And that's a good thing because people who we were never able to reach before that time, we're actually reaching them now. And so now, just like Dawn said, you got this new person, you welcome them in, you take them on a tour. Well, for the digital age, have someone monitoring your chat, welcoming new people. It depends on the size of your church, but if you have a big church, you want several folks online monitoring the chat, welcoming these people, making sure that they heard these are your next steps if you actually want to join our ministry, and do online church. I know we are designed to be in connection. I mean, actually touching one another. But there are some very real reasons why people cannot return. They're unable to return. And if we don't give into the technology age and invite them in online, we're losing out. And we're not just losing out, we're like at the point where Mordecai says to Esther, if you don't do it, somebody else will. But as for you and your family, I don't have to finish the rest of that story, right? And for you and your family. And so think about that the digital age is here. And this is how the next generation will function. And so we have to master it and have dominion over it. Because in Genesis, what does the word say? It says that he created mankind and then he gave them dominion over everything. That's not lording over people, that is lording over everything that's created so that it can bring God glory.
I, you know, I do think, I mean, we have this many women, we have 60 some women right now that are online watching this webinar. We did not do this before the pandemic. This was born out of the necessity of, hey, we still want to provide some training for women. And so this was an avenue that we have used, and we're going to continue to use it. The You Lead Virtual that we've talked about earlier, like that is something that now we can offer that to women, and it's a great way for them to get some training that maybe we didn't offer before. So it kind of accelerated us a little bit. But I am going to say and Brenda, I'm glad you brought up, like, I do feel like there's such a need for us to be in the same room. There's a need for us to be in community, and there's things that happen in the room that don't necessarily happen online.
Sure.
I would love to just be on Sunday morning eating my pancakes and, having coffee on the couch and watching a service, but that's really not the best way for me to do church all the time. So in the poll that we did, we noticed that some of you said people still aren't coming back, or there are a lot. So Dawn, how do we encourage people to come back in the room? What are some things that you would say would help?
You'll never go wrong with a personal invitation. Bottom line, a personal phone call. And we are actually even the past month, I guess, we have broken our church database down, and all the ministerial staff is looking at it line by line and noting who we have not seen return yet. So we can do that. And so personal phone calls, notes, just personal touches to let them, you want them to return. How are you doing? We've missed you. And the body life is deficient without you. The church is not complete without you. Invite maybe just a coffee to catch up, or invite to talk over Zoom. If they're still not able to come back, find out how they're doing, how you can help them re-engage in your church. There are some people, because of health reasons, they can't get the vaccine. So they're very hesitant to come back, or they're caring for someone that can't. So lots of different scenarios. But just as much personal touch as you can give, I think, is the best way to go.
I have heard of some churches, and I know this depends on the size of your church, but they have actually like taken their list, their roles, the names of people, and they are personally contacting them, like you said, and they're just going down the list, and they're just saying, hey, we just want you to know we miss you, or we want you to come back, things like that. I don't think it ever hurts, like you said, to have those personal invitations and to do that. So I think we need to be a little more intentional about that in some ways. Leslie, you touched on this, and I don't know if you want to expand any more on this, but because we have some new people that are coming in, we also have like new believers. Like I know we've baptized several people in the last year, and so exploring Christianity as a whole. I know your church has done some things kind of specific to that. So would you mind talking a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So if you have more than one church service, or even if you have Sunday school in between those church services, or before or after a church service, I think you can utilize that time and offer like an Exploring Christianity class for people to participate in. We've seen like a huge interest in that. We've done it, I think, 3 different semesters and have had a full room each time, which is very exciting. If that's not an option for you for whatever reason, one of the things we've done differently this semester in our women's Bible study is that we've broken up our weeks of like we're studying the book of Judges. And so on week 4, we stopped studying Judges and we had everyone read through John 3 for the week. And we asked them to read it in different versions of the Bible. and then that night we talked about what is a disciple, and we gave opportunity during that conversation to give a whole gospel presentation. And our table leaders had really intimate discussions with the women at the table about what they think a disciple is, and just had opportunity for more spiritual conversations. Because what we have found is that when we offer women's Bible studies, we have a lot of women who come into our church for those studies that are not a part of the church. And we also have women who are a part of the church that feel like that's a space where they can invite their lost neighbor, or their family member, or their coworker, or just a friend. And so we're just trying to find unique ways to kind of put that in there and give it opportunity. And we all know that we have women in our church that have been there forever, and they're not believers. They think they are, but they're really not. And this gives you an opportunity to kind of point that out to them. Be creative.
Okay, I'm going to go in and I'm going to try to add spotlights on everybody, like, to get us all here. Hopefully you can see all four of us here real quickly, because I want to hear from all of you, and I just want to, and we're going to go into a Q&A time because we've got several questions in the Q&A, and I just want to remind you, if you do have a question, just hit that little Q&A button at the bottom and you can type that in, and Michelle's going to get that to us here in a second. But one of the things that I get questions about, and I'd like to hear y'all's input from this, is events. Because I think there are a lot of ministries and women in general. It's like, okay, we haven't had a chance to meet with our women. Like, what are we doing? How are we going to do this? What does this look like? So would y'all just share some of the things that maybe you're doing with the women in your church, maybe an event that you've done, something that was successful? Give them some practical ideas of maybe things they can do with events. Who wants to jump in? Y'all are being quiet.
Everybody's being polite. I'll start. I
for
just
it.
finished an event with my ministry. The first thing was focusing on the numbers. When to be honest, when God first called me into this, I thought, I think droves and droves of women would be coming, and we would have this big group. But what COVID has reinforced is that the intentionality in a smaller event is so necessary. And so, number one, you can have an event, but make it limit the registration, and also take advantage of this spring weather that's coming up. Take your events outside. That might draw in some of the people that hasn't been back. They haven't been back because they are afraid. And so you could have an event, limit the number of people that are coming, and take it outside to an open space. So I know what you're saying. Well, Brenda, Michelle, what's going to happen? Because people are going to get upset if you limit it. If you offer it more than once within the month, then that will help to eliminate some of that. But smaller groups in open spaces, I promise some of those people will come back.
Yeah, just giving that atmosphere of there's a safety here and that we're taking care of you. I think that's important. Dawn, what about you? What have you guys done at Brookhill?
We wrapped up a workshop last night on Women of the Word, 5-week study. And so we were in a big room so we could socially distance, and there was no problem there. We've not done a church-wide women's event yet because numbers have just kind of gotten with COVID normal in our area. So we are doing smaller events, like Brenda said. We're doing our weekday women's Bible studies. For instance, we just did snacks that were self-contained, like individually wrapped. We didn't have a dish that you dipped out of, peanut butter crackers, an apple, a banana, things that are individually wrapped, that are individual servings. And they really appreciated that when we started the end of January. Again, our numbers have normalized in the area. So next week we'll go back to a breakfast casserole, a bowl of fruit, something that you dip, but we still got the hand sanitizers out, the masks at the door. People are encouraged to mask if they're comfortable, and a few still are. So we're slowly, we are doing a men's conference this weekend. We have 350. So things are starting to come back around. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think even acknowledging the fact, you can make the comment to everyone in the room just to say, hey, we just want you to know, we want you to feel comfortable and safe. So if wearing a mask that's important to you, this is a place you can do that. Like, we're not going to tell you can't. Like, we want to encourage you and doing, like you said, even just the hand sanitizer, things like that. Just having those things available to women, I think, are important. Leslie, what have you guys done at your church?
So we actually had a men's conference last weekend at our church, and we had about 1,700 men. They were super excited about being together, but we also, had men that wore masks. And we had masks available if anybody forgot one and decided they wanted one once they got there. But I would say variety. We've got to continue to have variety. So for instance, for our Bible studies and equip groups, we have women that are meeting in the church. We have women that are meeting in smaller groups in the homes, and we also have women that are on Zoom. So we have all of those options for all of our campuses, for all of our women. And then as far as events go, we've done some bigger events and we do some smaller things. And so I think the variety helps. So each month we have something that's called Coffee and Connections. And usually they take place in someone's home, or they might be outside if the weather's nice somewhere. But that's kind of like a more intimate setting where people can get to know each other. Because when you go to a really large church, depending on the size of your lobby, you just don't have a whole lot of time to meet people or interact. And sometimes you just don't know, man, has this woman been here, 2 days, 5 weeks, 7 months, or 10 years? I have no idea. There's just too many people. And so we offer these coffee and connections so that it can be a more smaller, intimate group of people who can kind of fellowship, get to know each other, and then be connected to bigger things. But we have had some gatherings at one of our campuses. We had 65 women show up. At another campus, we had 150. At another campus, there was almost 300. So it just really depends on kind of the culture of each culture and how comfortable they feel, how many women are actually there participating. But in every setting, people were welcome to wear their mask. We had masks available. Just like Dawn said, we were keeping the food in packages for people who, aren't comfortable with anything else. But I would say just variety.
Oh, that's really, I mean, you guys, you added a lot to that whole discussion. So I hope, and some of you put some really great ideas in the chat. I wasn't able to keep up with everything, but there was some great ideas happening there in the chat too of events and ways to do that. So, okay, Michelle, I'm going to ask you to unmute. I know we have at least 4 questions, but there's probably been questions in the chat section that I've missed. So,
well, absolutely. And thank you, ladies, for putting them in the Q&A, because as that chat keeps rolling, I know I lose some of them. I do want to thank Lisa Barker and Kathy Morales and several other people that are making such great recommendations and comments in the chat, because I know it's hard for the panel to get to everything. But when you guys toss in ideas and others can read those are so helpful. And so thank you all for doing that. Let me start with this first question from Denise. How do you encourage church members who no longer attend in person or virtually because of a time commitment, constraints to attend church, even during the week? Are there new scheduling tools or apps that could remind people to really literally spend time in, in whatever it's either by, she says faith practice, but I'm thinking whether it's reminding them. But I think this is pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, in the middle of the pandemic, just people with the busyness of life and their commitments or their priorities have shifted, maybe not always for the best, where they're not keeping their walk with Jesus maybe where it should be. But how do you really encourage those people who are maybe they're just virtual now, or it may be they're letting these other things creep in?
I think you have to have relationship, right? So even if I'm the women's minister, there are 1,500 women at my church. I don't have personal relationship with them. And so you encourage the women in your context to contact friends. Hey, your friend's been missing. Contact them and make a personal connection, because a lot of times things are going on that they might not feel comfortable sharing with me, but they will share with their friend. And that friend can offer that word of encouragement to say, hey, I know you have that going on, but the best place for you is here. So I think a personal connection is important.
Okay, great. Let me ask this one. This is kind of a side note, but it's something definitely to think about with the post-pandemic realities. Carla, they're preparing for a women's retreat, but small church, they need a speaker. What would you recommend for someone who they're not only looking for a speaker, but they need somebody who's going to be sensitive to post-pandemic realities?
I would just basically interview them and just say, tell me about your church during the pandemic. Tell me how you serve people. Tell me your impressions. Tell me what you learned. You'll get a sense of that by just interviewing them. And you let them know, I just want to ask you a few questions. We're wanting to be sensitive to this. And, you'll get the direction you need if you think that this person gets what you need to have happen for the event.
Great.
I also wanted to say something on that first question about, when schedules are busy and people can't come or things like that too. One of the things that we saw like soar through the roof when the pandemic hit was online Bible studies.
Mhm.
And so if you can go to lifewaywomen.com, and there's a whole tab on online Bible studies for someone who maybe is struggling to find a place. There are opportunities for you to get engaged with Bible study and engage in God's word. The Lifeway Women app, you can also find things there. So there are some, things that we have used technology for to try to help you in that. But as Brenda said, that relationship's really important. Okay, next question.
Good. Okay. Going back to greeting new guests, people visiting, all that, accessibility and inclusion for persons with disabilities is also a great and appealing way for new visitors. She kind of made that in there and added in, the chairs, lights, sound systems, hearing challenges, all those things, taking in account those things with your new visitors. Along with that question, have you all continued to have sections that are blocked off in some way where it is definitely a masked section, or there's certain rows or pews that are blocked off, where for those that they want to come back, but they want to make sure they have space?
We were up until last week. They filled in those sections with chairs, but at our church, everybody's still masked. We have not lifted the mask mandate yet, and so it's still pretty comfortable. But up until last week, we had those sections where, lots of space. But since our numbers are looking much better, they've filled in those sections with chairs.
Anybody else?
We still provide masks. We don't require them, but we haven't gone back to capacity at any of our services. And so there's spaces, especially, up top, where someone could comfortably feel like they're in a space that where they're, not surrounded by people.
A balcony or, yeah.
Yes.
Good. Anybody else? Okay, let me ask this one. This kind of goes back to when we were talking about maybe adding in time during small groups or Bible studies, allowing extra 15-20 minutes for just ministry to happen with people that are either the anxiety or the loss or the grief that they are processing post-pandemic or in the pandemic, whatever, however you want to word that, but and just making a safe place to share. And how do you, in that situation, how do you put people in place? How do you select your leaders or your people who will maybe guide those conversations, so that you're not just having people volunteer for that maybe are not as trained in the grief process or helping walk someone through some kind of trauma related to COVID, and it doesn't turn into a gossip session?
That's good. I honestly, I'm fortunate. I'm in a very large church, and we just have women within our ministry that are even like counselors by their profession. And so when we did that one event I shared about earlier about having the 3 women share, we had 2 women that were professional counselors, that our leaders who were praying with women could say, hey, you need to go talk to this person. Or we let everyone know who was at the event, hey, these 2 women are ready if you feel like you need to go speak with them. One of the things that I always try to be careful with is, if I'm going to open up a box, right? If I'm going to just open it up and let people, my responsibility before I do that is to make sure I have women who are trained to handle those conversations and who are prepared and equipped to do that. And so, man, I always say, you need to think through that before you just open that box up. And you need to make sure that you have women that you have did some sort of training with. If you have a pastor of counseling at your church, maybe bring them in and ask them, what should we do? I've had years where people have wanted to do breakout sessions at my conferences on, really hard topics like suffering and grief and loss. And the first thing I do is go to that pastor of counseling and say, what do I need to know if we do this? What do I need to have ready and available for these women? Because if we don't, man, we've blown it, right? We have really blown it.
Oh, you're muted,
Yep.
Michelle.
Yeah. Anybody else want to add to that? Anybody? Dawn or
I
Brenda?
would just say train them. I would just say find those. I mean, I'm just writing an idea down here from what Leslie said. I've got 3 counselors right now in my church. I just put their names down. Go to those ladies you have. God gives the body what the body needs, and
Mhm,
say, we need to train our leaders on listening skills,
mhm,
sensitivity to grief and loss,
mhm.
how to pray scripture for someone who's suffering, and ask those women in your church to train your women small group leaders, train your Sunday school teachers, your pastors' wives, elders' wives. Um, and if you don't know who those people are, ask God. He will bring them across your path. Ask your pastors, ask people in leadership. They're there. Retired school counselors are a great resource. Social workers are a great resource. Even women have been in in EMT or in the first responders. And I'll kind of wrap up on that, is that's something we did. This was a question that I did have, if Kelly had thrown out to me, is that during the pandemic, we went out and we took cookies to every church member that was a medical worker, a first responder, or a school teacher, because they were on the front lines, and we made deliveries. The staff took a day and took it to their homes just to thank them. And we've done lunches for the school teachers and bus drivers. And we intentionally reached into the community to just thank people for what they were doing and invite them to church. So those people are in your body.
Mhm.
They're
Good.
there to be utilized.
That's great. I am going to drop Kelly some more resources that we kind of had in our. I'm going to drop those in the chat for everybody just to add to these if anybody
Oh, she just muted herself.
did do more reading. I dropped it in. There we
All right. Yeah, thanks, Michelle. Like there's some great things. I don't know why, Michelle, but when you're adding those, it's not coming up as links. They're just so all the links that you've added, the only links that I think I really saw were the link to the Ministry to Women newsletter and the giveaway. So, and we might want to drop that back in one more
Okay.
time.
I will. Let me do that.
So yeah, just so in case you want to be entered into the giveaway, into that form, that would be great, and it gives you a chance to sign up for our Ministry to Women newsletter. All right, y'all, we're just about out of time. It always goes by so fast, and so thank you, Dawn and Leslie and Brenda. Thanks for what you do, and ladies, thank you for joining us. And we're praying for you. We know this is not. We know this is an ongoing conversation, and it's going to change and it's going to morph, probably even in the next 6 months. But hopefully, this has given you some ideas and some things that you can implement in your own ministry and in your churches. And we are praying for you. And next month, we are going to be talking about a subject about how to handle criticism. So that's going to be a really interesting webinar, because all of us are going to face some criticism at some point. So how do we respond? How do we handle it in that conversation? You can go to the lifewaywomen.com website. Just put in there "You Lead Webinars" and you'll find all of the webinars for the rest of the year. You can sign up, register, and then again, I get this question every single time, but we do record these. And so when it's recording, we upload all of the recordings to the Lifeway Women YouTube channel. So you can go and subscribe, and you can go back and you can get the training there. So thanks again for joining us today. And when I hit the end button, we're all gone. So thanks again for joining us, and we hope to see you next month. Bye, everyone.